I should also mention that mine is going to be shorter than expected. I'm taking one for the team because I'm not going to talk about Crohn's. I was planning to, because John will be talking about it afterwards, which means you will get to lunch soon. But the presentation this morning is less about facts and myths, and more about how something can be true but not necessarily relevant to all situations. Our supply chain is under increasing scrutiny, and we must be sure that we understand the perceptions and concerns of our customers and the evidence underlying them, and that we also present an accurate picture of the issues surrounding weather, and recognise that we are not isolated from the issues elsewhere in the supply chain. So obviously, the leather industry has often been attacked by agenda groups such as PETA, Viva, which is a vegetarian group, and Animal-Aid, and we've heard a lot of random claims including the impacts on human health and animal abuse. Things like we kill 1 billion animals a year, that turning skin into leather uses dangerous chemicals including mineral salts, salt as a mineral salt, that tanneries have been connected to leukemia in newborn populations. These organisations are, for the most part, well intended, they're usually misguided, but they're nearly always wrong. And the industry response has usually been to ignore them. For the most part, this is probably appropriate. We are unlikely to change the minds of these organisations through rational discussions. Their stance is driven by ideology, not evidence, and they believe it's wrong to use animals and animal products. We've also separated ourselves from the animal by falling back on the argument no meat, no leather. And that we are just using a waste product of the meat industry and have no influence on it or its suppliers. And this is also true. However, we need to be aware that these organisations can send powerful messages to our consumers that affect their opinions. For example, this is a Zara bag in Bangladesh. A report by the Blacksmith Institute, which is a very well recognised and respected institute, studying this area, placed tanning as the 4th most polluting industry in the world. Okay, while this report was not intended as an attack on the industry, the headline, the likely meme that comes out of it, is that tanning is a highly polluting industry. We know that these images are not representative of the industry at large, and in fact that is even acknowledged in the Blacksmith report. But for those with no understanding of the industry, these are extremely powerful images which could have an influence. Images of animal suffering are very powerful and hard to ignore. And this is often how organisations like PETA achieve their impact. The figure on the left is cows being transported in India, and the figure on the right is a sheep being mules in Australia. Clearly the treatment of the cattle is entirely unacceptable. And this may have actually had influence on policy making further downstream. And mulesing, which is an extremely contentious issue, is now being phased out in Australia because major organisations such as Abercrombie & Fitch and Liz Claiborne have begun to boycott Australian wool. We should also remember that John Lewis withdrew all of its Aurora products from its range as a result of the PETA campaign, even though there was no evidence through their supply chain of any kind of animal abuse. So these kind of organisations can have quite a powerful impact on our industry and related industries. However, for the most part, the livestock industry has borne the brunt of these attacks, and the leather industry has been subject to much less scrutiny. However, a different group are now scrutinising our leathers, and they cannot be ignored because they are our customers. These are groups that have obviously always considered quality and price, but now many of these people are developing policies on sustainability, the environment, animal welfare, corporate social responsibility. And as a result, the use of leather is and will be included in these. They're also looking at the whole leather journey. This is in order to meet broad commitments, such as commitments to fighting deforestation. And as such, they're looking at all the impacts associated with the raw material. Multiple areas of interest, including traceability, animal welfare, water use, climate change, land use, worker welfare, chemicals, and pollution. Just by way of example of some of these, Marks & Spencer's leather sourcing policy includes that cowhide must not be sourced from India. This has been the case since 2000. And this is in spite of the fact that India is one of the largest producers of hides and one of the largest exporters of finished leather goods, shoes, etc. Is this anything to do with PETA's campaign? It also introduces complexities in working out the provenance of the net goods. Traceability is a very important issue for these organisations. As we can see, they want to source leathers that do not contribute to deforestation, meet high welfare standards. Nike also, high animal welfare standards, and animal skins are not permitted from China, India, or the Amazon biomass. IKEA want all of their leathers to be fully traceable and produced according to standards that help protect forests and respect animal welfare. Again, a big traceability issue. They also want to reduce their carbon emissions from their own operations by 50% and those of their suppliers by 20%. And similarly, Burberry have traceability requirements. So it's clear that policies, that there is a trend developing for comprehensive policies that affect where the leather is coming from. Now, we would hope that brands would have a more scientific approach in evaluating the supply chain and gender groups. We would expect these kind of brands would take an objective approach to gathering and analysing data. But it's highly likely that the individuals responsible will have little or no understanding of that. As such, they will rely on official sources of information, such as the FAO, and this data will be taken at face value. However, we know that official reports by recognised bodies like the FAO have been shown to be unreliable, biased, or simply wrong. However, they have become the accepted truth by virtue of repetition, and an example of that perhaps is the FAO's report Livestock Shadow, which I'll discuss a bit more later. So it's very important that we know the prevailing opinions on supporting evidence, and that we dispel any misconceptions. I'm not going to consider two options, I'm going to consider one. I'm not going to talk about chrome. The climate impacts of cattle rearing are largely outside of botanists' control. However, both of these issues are currently subject, this issue is currently subject to considerable discussion and speculation, and it will impact to varying degrees on the industry. So again, climate impacts of cattle rearing have been a contentious issue for some time, and again they've been used by gender groups to attack meat and leather. Example of the kind of thing, go vegan. This claim here, interestingly though, is actually based on the conclusions of an official report by a global authority, the FAO. And this comes out of Livestock's Shadow. This is a report that gave considerable endorsement to the notion that cattle are responsible for a significant amount of climate change, describing animal rearing as the largest contributor to anthropogenic greenhouse gases around the world. The contribution was put to 18%, which is larger than transport. This report's now been pretty systematically debunked. It focused almost entirely on the impacts of the Amazon, including deforestation for livestock and the feed industry, and this was then extrapolated out to the global industry as a whole. On transport, it completely disregarded any of the effects of transport except for burning fuel in vehicles, so it's simply a measure of tank to wheel. If you remove the Amazon effects from it, the figures, using the FAO figures, drops to 13.5% for the global greenhouse gases from livestock rearing. However, if you look a little deeper, in 2007, the total greenhouse gases for beef dairy production in the UK was estimated at 8%, considerably less than the 33% that we saw for the transport. And in the US, the cattle and pig rearing total is estimated at 3%. However, this figure of 18% has proved very difficult to shift in people's minds. We've always argued that the hide is a waste and should carry no burden from the animal rearing phase. However, climate change is an important aspect of the sustainability claims of some of these major brands, and as such, we may find the animal phase is attached to leather as part of the life cycle assessment of products and brands, whether we like it or not. This has been brought closer to home recently by the EU Single Market for Green Products initiative. For those not aware of it, the EU is attempting to develop rules for the evolution of environmental footprints for products and make them consistent in order to improve customer and consumer faith in them. However, development of a accessible and efficient mechanism may mean that we are subject to more footprinting in the future. So it's very important to understand what the implications of that may be. As I said, in Europe, we are currently working on developing the rules for measuring the environmental footprint of leather. In order to maintain consistency in approach, where industries overlap, such as those making various use of various products of the cow, we are required to agree the rules by consensus or have them handed down to us. As part of the cow model working group, the leather industry has argued there should be a zero allocation of the upstream impacts of the hide on the basis that it's a byproduct of the meat industry. This argument was rejected. We could not reach consensus with the related sectors on the zero allocation of the hide. Because of this, the EC has handed the decision to the Joint Research Committee, and they have concluded that the allocation of the rearing phase of the hide should be done on an economic basis and it should equal 3.57% of the footprint of the animal. So whether we like it or not, it's possible that we may end up carrying the burden of the rearing of the animal. This could become the new norm for the hide. So the question then is, what is the carbon footprint of the hide? In 2013, the FAO released the Tackling the Climate Change Through Livestock report, which was a revision of their previous report, using a much wider data set, and it concluded that livestock were responsible for 14.5% of global greenhouse gases. Beef was the biggest contributor, with a global average of 300 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of protein, which translates to 46.2 kilograms per kilogram of carcass weight. To put another way, every kilogram of hide has a CO2 burden of 46.2 kilograms. This is a very big number. The problem is these numbers vary by region, they vary by rearing system, they vary by end production. If we consider two sets of data here, on the left we have the National Trust's Watch Your Beef data, which looks at variations in farming systems, and on the right the FAO's data, which looks at variations in regions. If we look at the UK data, top on the left, the three figures, you can see there is significant variation just by virtue of the farming system. This means that if you cannot say where your hide has come from within the UK, you could be introducing a massive error into your carbon footprint. If we look at the Brazilian figure, that's 103.9 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hide before you've done anything to it. This is because of deforestation. However, since this report was done, deforestation in the Brazilian biome has dropped off significantly, so this figure was already low. Again, now introducing another variable, another error. On the right, you'll see various regional differences. Eastern Europe comes in very nicely at 14 kilograms per kilogram compared to South Asia at 76. The difference can be connected to what you're doing. Dairy cows have a much smaller footprint than beef cows. The average for dairy cow is 18.2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram compared to a beef cow, which is 67. What this means, of course, though, is if you don't know where your hides are coming from, right down almost to the farm, you can't actually accurately calculate what the impact will be. Then, of course, there's sequestration, which is a little wild card. Soil carbon sequestration is a mechanism with a potential to offset agricultural emissions, including those from livestock farming. Essentially, soil can absorb and lock away atmospheric carbon. Obviously, this can have a significant effect on the apparent greenhouse gas emissions from the cattle rearing. And the UK all-party parliamentary group on lamb and beef production in the UK looked at sequestration. And what they found was that they compared 4 models of one farm. The official model, which DEFRA use, which does not include sequestration, made the farm a carbon emitter. The 3 other models, including sequestration, made it a carbon sink. In other words, there is no carbon with the cattle hide on this basis. If we compare the figures, broadly speaking, all were reduced in the UK. And if you look at the UK non-intensive, it drops from 12.7 to 0.8 kilograms per kilogram of hide. It makes it possible to make good policy using it if these things are not considered. The issue, of course, is that there's also that sequestration is also quite contentious. The rate that soil sequesters carbon is dependent on its age, on how it's been treated, and what's been done on it. This means that you could have neighbouring farms with different sequestration rates. There's also no international consensus on using sequestration. The UK doesn't use it, France does. which means that if we're comparing livestock between the UK and France on using official data, the kind of data that brands might want to access, then UK producers would be hugely disadvantaged simply by virtue of the French use of sequestration technology don't. What does it all mean for the tanner then? Well, we've got massively variable footprints, which are further varied depending on how they're modelled, which may then be introduced into the footprint of the leather. So how will this affect the footprint of the leather? If we consider UK tanners, and this is data using extrapolated from data that UK Leather has collected over the years, this is looking at the amount of energy alone, just the energy inputs consumed by UK tanners across the various productions in making leather. And that comes to about 1.49 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square metre. The German Eco2 label estimate, which includes transport chemicals, transport hides, and processing to finished leather, and then wastewater treatment, is the figure of 3.1 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square metre of leather. So where does the hide fit into this then? Well, if we use the JRC allocation of 3.57%, should be 3.51, the West European average of 19 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hide, and a live weight of the animal of 480 kilos, which gives us a hide weight of about 33 kilograms, that means the hide arrives at the tannery with 320 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram. On the basis of about 5 square metres of a hide that size, that means that you have 60.28 kilograms of CO2 per square metre of finished leather before you've even started. To put that in the context of the life cycle of leather, this is some figures from Jutta Nobler at ITG in Germany, looking at the life cycle of the leather upholstery in a vehicle throughout the lifetime of the vehicle. As we can see at the top, if we don't include leather rearing, we end up with an average figure for the upholstery of 17 kilograms per CO2 per metre square. As soon as we factor in cattle farming, and in this case it's done at 5% because this predates the UC work, that figure rises to 110 kilograms of CO2 per square metre of leather. And what that means is that if carbon footprinting is one of your prime drivers in selecting the material for your car, all of a sudden leather falls very, very unfavourably compared to other upholstery materials. So we're faced with a situation where the industry may be required to incorporate the impact of capillary into our carbon footprints. These things are not guaranteed as yet. But the upshot is that if we do, there is no significant reduction in the carbon footprint of the leather that can be made in the tannery. Nothing. We also have the issue that even within one country, if you cannot trace your hides, it's going to be very difficult to accurately measure what the input of the hide is to your leather. It may be very difficult to trace the hide back to the farm. In the case of the EU footprinting exercise, the EC has said that if you cannot produce quality data on the provenance of raw materials, that they will use the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario for Europe, an area that imports Brazilian hides, is the Brazilian hide, which currently is estimated to align with 103 kilograms of CO2 per kilo. Okay. You can imagine what that's going to do for your footprint. Good luck with that. Okay. So we may not be able to avoid the impact of the cattle on the product or on the footprint of our leather. But what we can do is ensure that customers have the full picture, because clearly that number is not the full picture. The inclusion of the animal footprint was a choice, and it's one that could have gone the other way. Life cycle analysis is not a hard science. There's a lot of reason and justification in it. I personally believe that by introducing the animal rearing portion into the European model has actually made the carbon footprint of European leather less useful and relevant at all. If we could help customers understand this, we'll be able to get them to disconnect from farming and ask what is the tanner doing to protect the environment. This is much more relevant for them and much more relevant for us. We may not be able to remove the animal impact from the leather, but we can remove it from the action of making the leather. Are cattle bad for the planet? Well, yes, no, maybe, depends. Or question what we measure and monitor. But that doesn't necessarily mean that leather is. The hide is a leather product and will be produced regardless of whether or not it is processed to leather or something else. The same cannot be said for cotton, textiles, or synthetics. For a fair comparison, they should be compared at the point that the raw material is derived for the same purpose. And for leather, that means the abattoir. By doing so, the actions of tanners to improve the footprint of leather will then actually be visible. And this can only be a positive driver. If we look at the presentation we've just seen, it's a very positive step to reducing the footprint of leather. Later this afternoon, Warren will be talking about what they've done at SLG. It's vital that the customers understand the vast impact on our carbon footprint is not related to leather manufacturing, as how it is. We also have to remember that no meat means no leather does not mean we should wash our hands of the meat industry. We are inextricably linked to them, and in making, in their case, on climate change impacts, we will help our own. I'm not going to skip through this stuff. It was fascinating. Okay, so finally, it's important that the industry can separate fact from fiction. And where necessary, we put those facts into the correct context. By doing so, it will be possible to show that done properly, leather manufacture and its use is sustainable, environmentally benign, and safe. Thank you.